thinking short term, if you're publicly traded, quarterly, versus thinking long term and transforming yourself. Buyers don't just, as you all know, buyers don't just flow beautifully through the sales funnel and it's just frictionless and it's, wonderful experience. It's not like that. In a given year, I would speak to 600 different companies around the world about how to help them sell. So if you think, should I build or should I partner? The old way used to be, I have to build. Mental health and wellness is really, really important. That's the first thing I'd say to what you said.
All right, so wherever you're at today, whether you're driving down the road to an appointment, whether you're maybe running on the treadmill, trying to lose some weight or something, you're thinking about the prospects who've booked on your calendar, like what you're going to do today, what are you going to say to them or ask? Whether you're about to pick up a phone in your office to call a potential customer, or maybe you're walking into a boardroom meeting right now to finalize a deal. Maybe you're doing that on Zoom right now with everything that's going on. Here's my question for you. Have you ever wondered, what does it take for you to be a top 1% salesperson in your industry? Okay, the salesperson who makes all the money, who gets any promotion they want. In fact, they turn down promotions they don't like. They have all the respect from management and ownership in their company. The salesperson who leads by example because they outsell everyone else. Well, my next guest is going to help answer that question for you. And let me give you a small taste of her background. She is a chief growth evangelist at Salesforce and author of the Wall Street Journal bestselling book, Growth IQ. Get smarter about the choices that will make or break your business. We're going to really dive into that today. She's been named to the latest Thinkers 50s list of the world's top management thinkers and is a welcome guest on Bloomberg, BNN, Cheddar. Is that CNN or BNN? Cheddar.
BNN.
That's what I thought. MSNBC and Yahoo Finance, among others. She also contributes her thinking to publications, including Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Entrepreneur, Quora, Thrive, Rotman School of Management, and Duke Dialogue Review. And as the host of What's Next with Tiffani Bova, an iTunes all-time business and management bestseller and a top sales podcast, according to Top Sales Magazine, she's interviewed a growing number of exceptional human beings, including Adriana Huffington, Chester Elton, Dan Pink, To Sell is to Human, great book, Ginger Hardage, Bonin Bao, I'm not pronouncing that right, Mark Victor Hansen, and Tom Peters. She's a top Twitter influencer in business growth, customer experience, digital transformation, the future of work, and sales. She was in fact named to one of Inc. magazine's 37 sales experts you need to follow on Twitter, a LinkedIn top sales expert to follow in 2018, 19, and 20, a top 100 women in tech, a Brand Quarterly magazine top 50 marketing thought leader, and one of the most powerful, influential women in California, according to the National Diversity Council. What has this woman not done? Please help me. Welcome to the show, Miss Tiffani Bova. How are you?
I'm good, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. What a long intro. Never meant to be.
What has she not done?
Yeah, that intro is never meant to be read in full. So that was, but thank you.
I'm going to give a bio next time what you have not done, because it would be shorter than what you have done. So, hey, I'm excited to have you here on the show. And I love talking with experts, especially sales experts, about human behavior and how to use human behavior as a sales professional or leader to really be a top sales person in your space. So thanks for being on here. Now, let's do this. I want to dive right into your story and give our listeners maybe a feel of your, let's say, your background and how you've arrived at this point where you're one of the elite authorities on sales leadership, on sales persuasion. Maybe give us a little bit of a background on how this started for you. Like, how did you learn all these skills?
So thank you again for having me. If I'm talking to salespeople, this is how I like to frame it. I call myself a recovering seller because I no longer carry a quota and I don't manage sales teams anymore, right? But my selling career, I guess, started very young. I think if you're in sales, you always know that that's where you're supposed to be. Yeah. I was an athlete, so I love competition. Sales was a way for me to professionally continue competition.
Sure.
So I was an individual quota bearing sales rep for a small little software company. And then I sort of moved up and moved up and moved up over the course of about 15 years. And my last, if you will, sales job was I was running a division of Gateway computers, for those of you who remember Gateway with the Holstein pattern cow boxes. And so I had sales experience, obviously. And then I took on marketing about halfway through my career. And then I also took on customer service. So it gave me this really rich view of the power of sales, but more importantly, the connection between the entire organization. Then I spent a decade at Gartner as a research analyst, and I ended that after a decade with as research fellow, and my area of coverage was sales transformation. So I advised from small tech companies all the way to the top 10 largest tech companies in the world. I helped them with their go-to-market selling models and how they can better optimize the way they sell. So that's sort of my journey, right? Carried a quota, carried a bag. And I think, as an academic, if you will, now watching it and talking about it, it gives me a very different perspective than those people who write a book about selling and have never sold.
Who have never been in the trenches. You're exact. It's more like theory rather than tactical training. Now, listen, I was on your website earlier. Let's talk a little bit about your book, Growth IQ, Get Smarter About the Choices That Will Make or Break Your Business. Now, I watched a video of why you wrote this, but I want you to let our listeners know, like, who did you really write this book for? And really, why did you write it?
Well, once again, since I'm talking to salespeople, I think you'll get it. For whatever reason, when it comes to really impactful business books, it's never a sales book. So it's kind of like sales is the other four-letter word. It's the dirty little secret of, I'm a firm believer that companies do two things. They make stuff and they sell stuff. And it doesn't matter if you sell stuff that you didn't make. At the end of the day, you're selling stuff, right? And you can call it whatever you want. But I had read over the course of my career so many books. And so I read 75 of the best business books. And I said, what was missing from it? And it's fascinating, right? If you do this as a leader, or you do this as a product, developer, you do this as an entrepreneur, an innovator, miraculously, these things happen. And it's like, and then the word sales wasn't even in the books. And so I said, let me write a book that's going to be more approachable for the realities of growth doesn't just happen. It happens because something was bought and sold.
Something was sold.
So that's why I wrote it.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, obviously nothing happens until a sale is made. Like no operations happen, no customer service happens, no human resources happens. Nothing happens until a sale is actually made, right? That transaction. Now let's go back to the beginning a little bit. You grew up in Hawaii from what I read.
I did.
How did the island life influence you?
So, I often get asked this question, and I look at it from two angles. One, Hawaii is, for those of you who have been there, right, it's a very special place, but it's also a melting pot of so much of the world. We, very much our biggest industry is government. So the military, we have all four branches of the military on one island. I think it might be the only place in the world that is true. And then the second is tourism. And so, I got this opportunity to meet so many people from around the world, and very much Pacific Rim was who lived there. So I was amongst, Chinese and Japanese and Korean and Thai and Vietnamese and Samoan and Tongan and Tahitian and Hawaiian, and I got all that, right? But it gave me this great appreciation for different cultures, different ways of life, different language, different ways in which people engage. I remember selling very early in my career to a group of Japanese businessmen. And at that time, it was sort of the early 90s. I had to sit at the furthest point away from the door because culturally, the most powerful person sat closest to the door. And oh, by the way, I also couldn't talk. I had to sort of communicate through someone else who worked for me, who happened to be a man, who then could communicate to the client. And so, it was a very interesting way to, be raised. And so my global role now is just sort of an extension of the fact that I was raised in such an amazing melting pot of cultures.
Yeah. So you learn how to adapt on the run, basically, right?
Yeah. And you just kind of got to go with it, right? At the end of the day, I was trying to sell, because I didn't get to talk. Look, that's for another day. That's for another fight, right? And 25 years later, I'm thrilled to say when I now travel into Japan, that's not the case, right? But ultimately, over the lifetime of my selling, especially in the technology sector over the last 15 or 20 years, I used to be the only sort of female or woman in the room, period, but definitely as a seller.
Yeah. Now you talked a little bit about your journey in the tech industry. Tell us more about the journey to your dream job at Salesforce. You talk a lot about it on some videos I watched. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. During my 20s, I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do, I like to say. During my 30s, it was all about consumption. I want sort of more responsibility, larger teams, sell more stuff, bigger company, bigger title, like all that kind of stuff. It was very much about consumption. And I changed jobs every 18 months. And why I did that was I wanted to manage bigger sales teams, or I wanted more responsibility, or I wanted a greater geographical footprint I was responsible for, or I picked up customer service, or I picked up marketing, whatever the case might be. It was really about that. And people used to say to me that I was a risk for a hire, because people would look at my resume and say, you're going to leave in 18 months. Sure. But it was more about, I wanted more, but I didn't know why. Like I didn't know sort of the journey. And I often say, trust the process. But when I hit my 40s, I said I was just tired, right? And I wanted to have a greater impact. And Gartner gave me that opportunity. In a given year, I would speak to 600 different companies around the world about how to help them sell, which is a lot of touch points, which meant I was seeing trends way ahead of the market. And I learned my superpower during that time, if you will, of kind of telling stories and aggregating lots of data points and being able to translate that for salespeople. And so when Salesforce approached me and said, hey, we want to create this role for you to keep doing what you're doing, I realized at that moment sort of that was what all that preparation was for, even though I didn't realize that it was for. And so now I'm able to continue to leverage such an amazing platform and brand such as Salesforce, especially in the selling community, right? Obviously. But I get to have really interesting conversations with sales leaders, customer service and marketing leaders, CEOs from, small startups and unicorns to the biggest companies in the world. And I think that, day to day, because like I said, I no longer carry a quota and I don't have a sales team. It's kind of the best of both worlds. I get to vicariously sell through the thousands of salespeople we have here at Salesforce. So it's really just a dream job.
Yeah, I love that. I love that path. Everything you did before, which you didn't understand, maybe you went through some trials, tribulations, things you didn't like, but without going through it, you would have never be where you're at right now, right? It made you
absolutely. And I think for people listening, that are in sales, look, I said it fairly quickly, but it's kind of trust the process. If you don't know what you want to do sort of in the future from a job perspective, what is it you don't like? And then what are your superpowers? Do you enjoy even managing people, or do you like being an individual contributor? Well, that's a decision point, right? Do you enjoy selling, high complex, long sales cycle deals? Or do you like selling short commodity deals? That's a decision point, and so ultimately, I think it's sort of just listing out what you really like and what you don't like. And then how can you create more of what you like? And do you not like things because you're not good at it, or you don't know how to do it, or you've tried it and you just don't like it? Because the unknown is not an excuse to say, I don't want to do it. Right.
I agree with you on that. Now, let's pivot here for a second. I was reading this on your website. You talk a lot about the importance of career contributions, giving back versus just consuming. What did you mean by that? And where did that pivot originate with you in your mind?
So I was just saying, right, in my 30s, it was kind of all about consumption. I was just more. Yeah. In my 40s, it was really about taking a break. I mean, for any of you who have aspirations of running a global sales organization or having a 100, 200, 300, $400 million quota, it's a lot of work. And I was burnt out. I'd been really slogging hard for about 15 years. And so Gartner was, if you will, a break for me, although many people would go, I don't even understand how that's possible, because I was working very hard, but it was a different kind of work. And so I was trying to figure out, what is my next thing? What is my value? Sort of what do people want to hear from me? And I learned during that time, people were signaling to me what was valuable of my content. And as I sort of was getting closer to my 50s, which I joined Salesforce when I turned 50, I realized that this was much more of a time in my life where I wanted to contribute, right? Yeah. Doing podcasts like this, like talking about my journey, about why I wrote the book. If I could inspire one person to go and stretch and try something different, that's what I mean by contribution. Okay. And so I think it just came with wisdom and age and trial and tribulation. But I will tell you, what's really inspiring is the younger generation that's already in contribution mode, like they're already have that mindset. And so I think that that's spectacular. I don't think it has to come when you turn 50, but I think I had less of a balance of
Sure.
consumption and contribution until I got closer to 50. But if you could find a way to do that, whether it's donating to a college, which I do often, that is now
Yeah.
teaching selling and, giving certificates on sales. I mean, there was nothing like that. There wasn't even a marketing MBA when I was going to college, right? So, it's great to see that they're trying to put some rigor around the education of that. But that's what I mean by contribution.
Yeah, and it's great that you have that contribution, because I see a lot of people want to give that contribution many, many years before they really have the experience or the know-how to actually do it. And because they do it so early, sometimes has a negative impact, because people believe them and follow them into, like, I call it dark paths off of where you really want to be. So sometimes it just takes a while to learn and to go through that experience before you can really successfully teach people how to do that. And that just takes experience and knowledge. It's not something you're going to get, in a year of doing something, 100%.
Yeah. And I double down on that. I mean, I have a lot of people who reach out and they'll say, oh, I want to do what you do. And my first question to them when they say that is, so tell me what I do, because I'd love to be able for someone to tell me what I do, because it's really hard to describe what I do. I mean, you read the bio, it's confusing, sort of, what do I do every day? And I get to, wake up and sort of share the art of the possible of what experiences other companies have had in completely different industries, geos, segments, verticals, and maybe there's something to learn for that company. But I will tell you that one of the biggest advantages I think I had, and then my client said I had when I was at Gartner, was I had actually done the job. Yeah. And so there's a lot of power in, if you really want to do things like that, is maybe go take 6 months or a year and work in customer service, go move from sales into marketing, understand what that is like, and then go and begin managing a team. And so the more experience you have, the better you have the ability to say, wait a second, while I might think that's the way it's going to happen, I listened in to customer service for, I listen in one day a month, every month, to what the customers are saying. That's not what our customers are saying. And just that pause, just that hesitation to say, I may not have the answer, will come when you get that experience, and cause you to rethink your position.
Yeah, cause you to rethink your position and where you need to adapt. Now, let's go back into the book. So in Growth IQ, you provide a list of 10 growth paths. Why 10? Why 10? Where does that come first and foremost?
Yeah. So going back to why I wrote the book, and that there wasn't a, sort of a big business book about sales, was I said, why reinvent the wheel? So once again, a skill I learned when I was an analyst is I went out and looked at all of the growth strategies that have been put in place over the last 50 or 60 years. Something like the Ansoff matrix, which, you can go look it up if you don't know what it is. But why reinvent that? Yeah. So I went and sort of grabbed all of those growth ideas, big thinking growth ideas, and I modernized them to the fact that we now have social, mobile, cloud, big data, AI, analytics, virtual reality, augmented reality, etc. Right? And we have more power in this than we had, in our offices, 10 years ago. Sure. So that means that is the strategy not correct today? No, the strategy is still correct. But you have to widen its application because of the fact that we now have all these different ways in which we can sell, market, service, engage, et cetera. One of the stories in the book is Kylie Jenner, and whatever you may think about the Kardashian Jenner family, if you go back 20 years, you could say, do you think somebody could have launched a makeup line, grown, to $500 million? Let's not argue the billion. Let's just say $500 million, right? In less than 3 years, with 12 employees, with no traditional marketing. No. So then you'd say, well, let me look back at L'Oreal or Mac or, anybody. And they said they didn't get to their first billion for almost 20 years. And she technically did it in, less than 5. So what's different? Yeah. It was all about that selling model, the strategy. She used scarcity. She used partnerships, right? She used all the things that everybody did. But she didn't do it the traditional route. She said, I'm going to go tap into my 120 at the time, I think, million social media followers. Yeah. So, not everybody has that kind of power on the social platforms, but can you learn from how she did it? Yeah. Right. She didn't hire, 1,000 people. She didn't create her own manufacturing plants and warehouses. She partnered to do it all. So if you think, should I build or should I partner? The old way used to be, I have to build. I have to build, I have to own the entire supply chain. And we now know that's not necessary anymore. So that's why the 10 sort of showed itself, was because I just went to the ways in which so many businesses in the past have done growth and strategy historically.
And growth IQ starts with customer experience.
Yes.
Why is customer experience path number one?
So this is somewhat a conversation that I find that some salespeople will jump right on board right away, but there's a few things I know for sure.
Yeah.
My truth, hopefully they're your truth, is number one, salespeople do not wake up every day and can't wait to data enter.
Sure.
So I know that to be a truth.
Yeah.
I know, funny coming from me, considering where I work. However, like, our job is to try to make that easier, right? But that's one truth. The second truth is customers do not wake up every day and say, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Today is the day I go from stage 2 in the buying cycle to stage 3 in the sales journey. They also don't say that.
Sure.
We as sellers tend to get very wrapped around our process.
Yeah.
I do this, then I do that, then I do this, then I do that. And we negate the fact that, well, hold on a second, what does the customer actually want to do? And this has huge implications to pipeline review meetings and forecast meetings, and the sales funnel, the marketing funnel, which I hate,
Sure.
because ultimately that isn't the way people buy. Buyers don't just, as you all know, buyers don't just flow beautifully through the sales funnel and it's just frictionless and it's, wonderful experience. It's not like that.
Yeah.
So I can just say that I started with customer experience because I want salespeople, and business leaders to get out of their four walls, out of their processes, and try to understand what is it that the customer wants, and then how do you meet them where and how they want to engage and buy.
Well, so true. I mean, today's consumers don't want to be talked at and sold to. They want to be asked, listened, and understood.
Sure.
And once you understand what that actually means, it's a completely mindset shift in your sales process and how you interact with potential customers on the sales side, 100%, customer service side, really everything. Now, let's talk about the pandemic, because we're here in that part now. What's changed in regard to the customer experience since the pandemic?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to give you a Salesforce example. So our CEO, Mark Benioff, we were sort of in the end of April timeframe-ish.
Yeah.
And Mark gave a challenge to the entire company to have 1 million conversations with customers.
Yeah.
Not 1 million sales calls, not 1 million pipeline and forecast, like 1 million conversations.
Yeah.
Through those conversations, it was a whole program that was pulled together that we were able to capture from everybody that was having those conversations, what we were hearing from our customers. Lo and behold, from that, we've launched 4 or 5 new products. Yeah. Because we heard what they needed during this new reality we were living in, right? No more field sellers, everyone's virtual, everyone's inside. What happens? Everyone's on video. How do we capture video in a CRM system? Okay, if we're going to send people back out to the field at some point in time, let's make sure they're safe when we do it. Can we do mapping against where are there outbreaks? Should we not have our people go there? If it's a matter of, allowing listening and coaching through video, not just voice, all kinds of things, but that came from these conversations. Yeah. Then he said, now that we know that, we need to reorganize sort of, what our product pipeline looks like, what our teams look like, what our company looks like. And we followed the fact that the customer now had different requirements for someone like us. Sure. And it was really amazing. We found that companies wanted to learn how to stabilize their business, right? Let's sort of make sure everyone's okay. The second was get back to work. Because early on, it was like people were going, what do we do? And now it's really get back to the office. And the third was get back to growth. How do we get people back to selling and servicing and engaging with customers? And so once we rolled out that framework, it was amazing to see a lot of our customers come in and go, tell us how we can do the same thing, right? So that's why I think that it's really important during this time.
You ask questions to your customers or prospects, and you help them find problems that maybe they didn't even think they had, right? So you've now become a problem finder and problem solver, rather than just, most salespeople are taught to be product pushers. We could probably train on that for a couple hours right now. Now, let's dive into this. What do you think is the biggest reason right now why so many buying decisions are stalling in the marketplace?
Look, the reality is, one of the very first questions I got, I went out and did a Twitter Ask Q&A. what are you thinking about? And the number one question I got are people still buying? Now, once again, this is sort of April, right?
Yeah.
The answer is yes, in certain industries, obviously. In other industries like travel, hospitality, hotel, airline, tough time. But you have other industries that are really shining through. But what was really inspiring was seeing how quickly people pivoted. So I like to use restaurants as an example, right? A restaurant who didn't have their menu online, didn't already have an arrangement with Uber Eats or Grubhub, didn't have access to who their customers were, right? Tiffany eats dinner here every Thursday night with her family. Isn't it great? She's been doing it for 5 years. Pandemic hits and you go, I don't know who Tiffany is. I know her name, but I don't know her email, her phone number. I know nothing. So I can't even reach back out. Those kinds of businesses got really caught flat-footed, right? Because they had no ability to keep conducting business. Those that had already started to make investments in digital and transforming the way that they do business were in much better position. So I'd say that this really cracked open the lack of investments across so many industries when it came to these new avenues of engagement and sales.
No, I think it's 100% true. And, so many buying decisions are being solved right now because, and there's a few things to do about it, right? There's solutions to it. Just like you said, you shift. But a lot of companies, typically they look at like their forecast in a regular time pre-COVID was, what are we going to do 2-3 years from now? Now they're looking at what are we going to do within 90 days from now? That's what they're thinking, right? It's more short-term rather than longer thinking, a lot of these companies, right? So you have to learn as a salesperson how to ask specific questions that help build urgency for them to do something now rather than down the road. Because what are some potential consequences if they don't do anything like you just said? If they haven't gone digital, if they haven't, gotten customers' emails and they haven't, subscribed to kind of what you talked about with Grubhub and these things. If you're a restaurant, if you didn't do that before and you didn't shift right in the beginning, you're probably out of business right now. So here's my question for you. What are a few questions that a salesperson should really ask in the sales process that would help build urgency in the sale to prevent stalling from happening?
This is tricky, right? Because if I give an answer to a salesperson, that is, we need to be much more empathetic sellers. We need to ask a lot more questions. The problem then I hear from sellers is, I still am being held to a quota number. I still have to close business. So all that sounds great, but I got to close some deals. So I'm glad that I can have this conversation about how are you doing and what's happening and how can I help you? But I'm trying to move a deal. So how do I do that, right? If I'm talking to an individual seller, like I said, but unless the sales management starts to give some relief on quota, on productivity metrics, like you have to give some relief so that sellers can do what customers actually want today, which is not maybe pushing the forecast and the pipeline and the deal through the journey, and trying to force it because you're under such pressure to hit numbers. So I think that, it is really, as you said, you have to become master askers, asking much better questions so you can uncover like, how's it going? Is there anything we can do to help you during this time? And, and start those kinds of conversations goes a long way. Now, the challenge now is we're 7 months in, that conversation should have already happened. And so if you haven't had that conversation, it's hard to now make it up because what we've now told our customers is you don't care enough about me. That sort of million conversations, maybe it's 100 conversations. So I would challenge the salespeople who are listening to say, I'm going to have 100 conversations that have nothing to do with a deal. This week, whatever, right? But you can't do that unless your manager lets you do it, right? Because if you're not touching a deal and moving the deal in the system, then you're going to get in trouble. So I think this is really a role for sales managers to reimagine what it's like to actually inspire and manage your sales teams. Now, something you just said a minute ago, I wanted to go back to the 2 to 3 year horizon versus 90 days. I coined a term called the seller's dilemma many years ago, and I call it out in the book. And the seller's dilemma is thinking short term, if you're publicly traded, quarterly, versus thinking long term and transforming yourself. And those that only thought short term got caught flat footed. They hadn't made the investments they needed to make. So my challenge to you would be, you need to do both right now. You need to have the short term view because you have to keep the doors open, but you have to be thinking, look, buyer expectations are forever changed. Habits are forever changed. Look, will retail establishments stay open or will they remain, buy online, pick up in store, fulfillment centers, and you're going to do curb pickup? And will that continue? I'm going to guess it's going to continue. So is half the store a footprint you can walk in at, and half the store is a warehouse and fulfillment to get that last mile solved? Because all of a sudden we as consumers have solved the last mile ourselves by pulling up and picking it up ourselves instead of waiting for it to be delivered.
We're
So
creatures of
think
habit.
differently. Yeah.
We're creatures of habit. Yeah. And I think a very important question that every seller, and I don't even like the word seller, but every professional should be asking their prospect are, consequence questions. Like, what are they going to do if nothing changes? Right. So, case, for example, when the pandemic hit, there's a very large insurance company that we train, and they panicked. They're like, well, what are we going to do? Blah, 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 blah. Like, we can't go, because their biggest thing was being in the homes of the prospect. And they're like, well, we're just going to wait. We're going to wait this out 2 months. It'll come back to normal. And I simply said, well, what are you going to do if it doesn't go back to normal in 2 months? Just that one little question, that little consequence question, got that CEO to think like, we hadn't talked about, well, what would be some of the possible ramifications if it doesn't go back to normal in 2 or 3 months down the road? Like, what would happen to the company then? What would happen to your sales force at that point? And he's like, you're right. Like, we would lose half our sales force. So we obviously switched and went virtual, and now their sales are dramatically higher just because the selling skills. But number two, they can see a lot more people, right? Their reps aren't driving 2 hours to an appointment. They're seeing 3 or 4 people in that 2 hours that they would have been driving. So just those little consequence questions really cause urgency in that prospect's mind to think like, what if we don't do anything about this?
Well, there's 2 things I'd say there. One, 100% agree that we can do more as salespeople on a day-to-day basis because we don't have windshield time and fly time. Last year, I flew 375,000 miles. I did 100 keynotes in 6 continents. Yeah. Trust me when I tell you, I got a lot more time on the ground because I'm not flying, right? But what it also has done is we have to be mindful of the fact that our salespeople are burning out. Yeah. That because the pace is so frantic, because there is this added layer of anxiety on hitting numbers and keeping their job and keeping their health insurance and a paycheck coming in and all of that. Yeah. As sales leaders, we have to make sure we give our people space and make sure they're okay. And so as leaders, not only touching base about forecast and pipeline, but how are they doing? Giving them half-day Thursdays off, only book so many meetings a day. Like mental health and wellness is really, really important. That's the first thing I'd say to what you said. Yeah. The second thing I'd say is that unfortunately, where we began this podcast is sales is kind of the other 4-letter word, right? And it doesn't get the same level of rigor that other parts of the business get. And one of them is scenario planning. Yeah. Scenario planning happens in other parts of the company, but not in sales. To your question, well, what happens if it doesn't come back? Like that answer should be, what if it doesn't come back for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and you did it today? Yeah. What does that mean from a scenario perspective? How do you skill? What do you train? Who do you need? When do you do what you need to do? And so if you know those scenarios, then everything's baked. When it comes to 6 months, if it turns back on and things have gotten better, you can execute on that plan. But if in 6 months, then you turns back on, you're like, oh, we have to scramble to get ready. You're going to be right back in the same situation again. So once again, individual contributors, unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of control over that. Yeah. But it's something you could ask, like, hey, if I start to be able to go back out in the field, what would that look like, Mr. Miss Manager? What can I do? So ultimately, that's what I mean by rigor, that whole scenario planning, for those of you who know what that means, does not happen very often in sales.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Tiffany, I can't thank you enough for joining us here today. Do you have any final thoughts or advice for our listeners, especially during this trying time? And here, when I say trying time, I say that with a grain of salt because I train so many salespeople and organizations that are like crushing their numbers right now, that to them, going virtual and these different things has been like the best thing for them. But any advice or final thoughts you'd give our listeners?
Yeah, I would just say take care of yourself, right? It's great you're crushing quota. It's great you have the ability to do 10 meetings a day versus 2 because of drive time. But just, take care of yourself. I think it's really important during this time because we can always make more money. We cannot make more time, and you can't make it back. So, thinking about that, I think, is first and foremost in my mind. I think trying to find some semblance and balance to make sure that you give back to yourself as much as you are giving to your job and to your customers. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that, look, I believe, selfishly, the world revolves around salespeople, right? But that's my view. I think that you are the Achilles heel for companies up and down size, globally, geographically. And it doesn't matter if you have a sales on your business card or not. Everybody is responsible for growing the business. And so I'd say become a student of your profession. How do you become a better storyteller? How do you take classes and learn how to be better at what you've chosen as your profession? There's always ways to be better. Look, I blew out my quota too, but I was always open to learning and listening. And even listening to this podcast is a great example. The fact you're listening to this means you're open and willing to learn new things. And so that's what's really important, is always just have that beginner's mind of learning every day.
Well, I always say low six-figure earners, salespeople, always have the largest egos, right? Because once they hit a certain level of income, they think, oh, I'm the best. I know I don't need to learn anything. And that's why they stay at the same level, right? And typically they go backwards, or they'll go to a different industry and they can't figure it out, right? Because they haven't really mastered the art and science of persuasion, getting prospects to persuade themselves rather than, chasing after them. Causing resistance. So where can our listeners learn more about you and your training though?
You could follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, as you mentioned in my bio. You can pick up a copy of the book Growth IQ, if you so like. It's right behind me on this side. You can see the cover. And listen to my podcast, What's Next with Tiffani Bova. But, I like hearing back, what resonated and what I said, what didn't you agree with, drop me a note in social media. I'm pretty good at responding back. But I think that I don't have, if you will, a formal training program. I just try to instill the nuggets I learn along the way and share them in that contribution mode. And hopefully it makes a difference for some people along the way. So that's the goal.
100%. All right, Tiffany, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Now, if you're serious about joining the top 1%, I mean the top 1%, and you want to experience more training content just like this, click the links right over there. Right over there, they're exactly what you need to see next. You see, I release new episodes featuring top salespeople and sales authorities, multiple six-figure, high six-figure, even seven-figure earners every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday every single week at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you're new here, do yourself a favor and smash that subscribe button right below, and join our new Facebook group, Sales Revolution. You see, it's free, and there's a link in the description below just for you. We put it there for you. Finally, I make posts on Facebook and Instagram each and every day with more tips and training, so be sure and follow me and turn on your notifications. So make a comment in the first 7 minutes to any of my latest posts, share this episode, and there's a very real chance that you're gonna win some killer prizes. And here's the thing. Don't sit on the sidelines. Don't be like everyone else. Get into the game. Join the sales revolution. Stay active, get involved, learn the right skills, and we will show you how to take your life and income to a level that most only dream about. Stay safe. Talk to you soon.